We're here to highlight one of the gravest long-term threats to New York's economy and health, and it really hasn't been focused on enough by our state leadership. I'm referring to the devastation we are seeing in the restaurant and the hospitality industry, an economic force that provides over $50 billion to our economy in a typical year, and it's been brought to its knees by this pandemic. Our Reset New York strategy depends on resetting New York's restaurant and hospitality industry. As a restaurant owner myself, it has been both heartbreaking and frustrating to see the incalculable damage being done to this industry. To see restaurants around my district, including many landmarks, that have closed their doors for good. That same scenario is played out throughout New York State. In fact, I'm told it's Restaurant Week in New York City right now. Normally a great way to not only put a boost to our economy, but to highlight some of the great institutions. And that has been absolutely shuttered by not the pandemic, but by bad policy. And that's what we're here to talk about today. When this lockdown began in March, I began sounding the alarm, but even then I never imagined that New York's on pause would extend for months and then followed by crippling restrictions. And here we are, a year later, and we are still grappling with this. And the reality is, this has been a pandemic issue that has been exacerbated by catastrophic policy. The New York State Restaurant Association reported that in December, 8,333 restaurants in New York State alone have closed, 4,500 in New York City. Over 365,000 jobs, or 45%, have been lost in the past year. This is truly an emergency. Every day that passes without change is a direction, is a lost opportunity to help stabilize this devastated industry. And look, I agree that we need to protect New Yorkers. We need to keep them safe as part of this pandemic. But these lockdowns have not reduced any numbers. They have not provided the results that we've been told that they will. Just to give you an example, the governor measures everything by hospitalizations. How many people are in the hospital because of COVID? Well, in New York State, currently, there are 8,600 people in the hospital with COVID. We have the most restrictive lockdown in the nation, with the exception of possibly California, which has 18,600 people in the hospital. However, in Florida, which has none of those restrictions, there are only 6,727 people in the hospital. So we have more people, thousands of more people in the hospital in New York State with COVID than the state of Florida, which has no such restrictions. This is not a policy that is working for our economy or for the public health. The added evidence against restrictions in public places came from the governor himself when he announced that the results of the December survey indicating that just 1.4% of COVID infections were the result of dining. And even that number, to me, is unreliable at best. The governor claims that 74% of those infected come from gatherings in households. And yet the restaurant industry is only 1.4%. But I lived through COVID, my wife and I. We went through this. And we were contacted, by a contact tracer. And my answer when he asked, do you know where you contracted COVID from? My answer was, no, I don't. Where in the governor's numbers are unknown. He is making decisions that are life and death decisions that are impacting our economy greatly with bad data. Because nowhere in those numbers is there, I don't know. That means that the contact tracer that I spoke with had to choose one of those locations to determine that's where I got my COVID infection from. Bad data making decisions that are impacting the lives and the livelihoods of millions of New Yorkers. That's the problem that we have to address. A cornerstone of our reset plan in legislation that I'm sponsoring that would offer immediate support and relief, the provisions of this bill would ease businesses' cash flow crunch, enabling them to keep their doors open and their employees on the payroll. The bill would exempt small businesses from being penalized for higher unemployment insurance rates due to layoffs resulting from government-mandated closures and restrictions. And after a year-long advocacy in the Senate, we finally had this last week. We finally passed a bill to hold harmless businesses when it came to the unemployment insurance experience ratings. Although that bill does not go far enough. We're proposing extending that for 1 year after the pandemic restrictions are lifted. So that's critically important. We have a long way to go before we recover from this pandemic, and to hold harmless in place until we can properly recover is what this bill will do. We also have a bill that would stop providers like Grubhub and DoorDash from charging higher fees. And again, I know we addressed this in part, but the bill that the Democrats passed, that passed in the legislature, which we all supported, caps that at 15%. Our bill would go further. We also have provided for small businesses additional time to pay monthly sales tax and payroll taxes, as well as business and property taxes. I can tell you, as a restaurant owner myself, that this is critically important. The government, essentially, of New York State has not given any kind of relief for the taxes and fees and so forth that are imposed on our restaurants and hospitality industry across the state. Again, also the liquor licenses. Liquor licenses are very expensive, and in many cases, they are a make or break for a lot of our hospitality industry. So we also have a bill that would propose basically a one-year suspension on having to pay those renewal fees. I mean, think about it. As a liquor license holder myself, I can tell you that even at 50% capacity, which only a few restaurants are able to enjoy even right now, to have to pay 100% of that fee, that very hefty fee, is a huge issue. And for many places that have been closed and not reopened, I'm talking about entertainment venues, live music venues, things like that. They have paid that fee to New York State, and because of New York State's restrictions, have been able to use zero of that license. So we need to look at these licensing fees, particularly the liquor licenses, and look for a way to provide relief so we can give one more opportunity for those places to be able to hopefully stay afloat for as long as they can. Also, the state has the ability to offer low interest and interest-free loans, and this is another bill that we have as part of this package to ensure that we can actually give the relief to those that are struggling and just need a little more help to get themselves out of this pandemic. This is a pandemic that was obviously not the fault of anyone, but the policies that we've seen in New York State have truly crippled these businesses, and to provide a little bit of relief in the form of interest-free and low-interest loans will be something else the state of New York could do and has not, at this point, taken any action to do so. We need to take decisive action right now. Thousands and thousands of New York businesses are closing every day. We're going to see more and more. We need to move now to ensure that this industry, which has been the lifeblood of New York State, it is the number one source of sales tax revenue in New York City. Number two statewide. That alone is going to be a huge impact on state government and local governments as well, as we see our sales tax revenue, which many counties rely on almost solely to provide the services that they provide, are going to struggle as the sales tax revenue continues to decline. As a business owner myself, I can tell you how difficult it is to do business in New York State. Prior to the pandemic, every day was a struggle. I bear the scars of doing business in the state, and now the state needs to step up and help us ensure that this industry is able to continue on and prosper. It is the lifeblood of New York State.